At some point in your investing journey, your portfolio will generate more in a single year than you put in. It's called the tipping point. And once you understand what determines it, when it happens, and what occurs after, it changes how you think about investing. In this video, I'll show you what that means, how to calculate it, and how to work out exactly how far away you are. When you invest, you have two separate forces working on your portfolio at any given time. The first is you, the money you put in, your regular contributions that go in every month. And this is finite because it's limited by what you earn, how much you choose to invest, and as we'll come on to, if it's in an ISA, limited by an annual allowance. It also requires you to remain consistent, even when life gets expensive or when markets are down and there's widespread panic. The second force is compounding, the returns your portfolio generates on its own, the dividends being reinvested and the capital growth. Money makes money. It's the snowball effect. And this requires as much input as you choose. But once set up, it in theory doesn't require any. In the early years, these two forces are very unequal. You're doing almost all of the work. If you've got £10,000 invested, 7% annual growth gives you £700. If you're putting in £500 a month, you're contributing £6,000 a year. Your efforts are producing roughly 8 times what your portfolio produces on its own. This is why it's so hard at the start. Compounding exists, but it's such a small amount relative to your contributions. But as your portfolio grows, the balance shifts. You move along that exponential curve. And at some point, if you've been consistent enough, the compounding overtakes the contributions. That crossover is the tipping point. The reason I think it's worth understanding properly is that so many investors go through their entire journey without ever thinking about it in these terms. You think about how much you contribute and which funds you hold, but you don't think about the relationship between what you put in and what that money generates on its own. It's that relationship that tells you more about where you are in your investing journey than almost any other number. Let's put some numbers to this. I'm going to use an average annual return of 7%. The long-term global stock market average is around 9 to 10%, but this accounts for around 2 to 3% of inflation. Being the stock market, you're not going to get this exact return every year, and it's not guaranteed. But over a long period of time, it's what we can roughly expect as an average. So say you have £50,000 invested in a diversified global portfolio. At 7% annual returns, that generates £3,500 in growth over the course of the year. And if you're contributing £500 a month, you're putting in £6,000 a year. Your contributions are still doing almost twice the work of your portfolio. But that's because although it's a decent amount invested, you're still in the early heavy lifting phase. Now let's say your portfolio has grown to £100,000. The same 7% return, that's now £7,000 in annual growth. If you're still contributing £500 a month, you're putting in £6,000. Your portfolio is generating slightly more than you contribute. You've crossed the tipping point. At £150,000, that same 7% return generates £10,500 a year. Realistically, you probably would have increased your contributions by this point. You could add another 50% each month, so you'd be contributing £9,000 per year. Still £1,500 less than what the portfolio was generating. And at £200,000, the annual growth is £14,000. Let's say you've also increased your contributions to £1,000 per month. At £12,000 for the year, your portfolio is now generating £2,000 more than your contributions. That's how this scales. The longer you stay invested, the quicker it grows. The curve starts shallow and then it rises exponentially. So how do you know where you are right now? So take your current annual contribution and divide it by 0.07. That's your portfolio tipping point target. So if you're investing £500 per month, that's £6,000 per year. This would give you a tipping point of around £86,000. In terms of how long this would take, you can use a compound calculator. But if you're using an average return of 7% and starting from zero, it will always be around 10 years, regardless of how much you contribute. That's because as you increase the amount you contribute, it also proportionally increases the portfolio size you need to generate that level of return. I've put together a table of varying contribution levels so you can see the tipping point of each one. So if you're investing £500 per month, the equivalent of £6,000 per year, you would need a portfolio worth £86,000 to generate that in returns. In every case, it will take you about 10 years to get there if you started from zero and kept the contributions the same throughout. Of course, it will be less if you had already started. For example, if you have £20,000 invested and you're investing £500 a month, you would get to the £86,000 needed in about 7 years. The other interesting thing is what happens at the top end, which may seem quite far away now, but if you're able to get to £1,666 invested every month into an ISA, you'll be maxing it every year. In 10 years, you'll be getting that maximum amount purely from returns. You could stop contributing altogether and still have the effect of maxing out your ISA every year. If you want a starting point for what to actually invest in once you know where you are on this journey, I've put together a free ETF cheat sheet that breaks down the best options for UK investors. The link is in the description. So if the tipping point is this significant, why do so many investors never reach it or end up reaching it much later than they should? There's three main reasons. One of the biggest is that a lot of investors simply underperform the market. A study done by JP Morgan revealed that between 1998 and 2017, the S&P 500 delivered an average annual return of 7.1%, while the average investor earned just 2.6% per year. This is almost entirely down to human nature and emotions. In order to achieve the average returns, you have to be almost robotic. During this period, you would have had to held strong and not panic through both the dot-com crash and the global financial crisis, both of which experienced drops of around 50%. As retail investors, we also love trying to time the market, and in most cases, we find out exactly why it is so hard, either sitting on the sidelines in cash, watching the market rally, or buying what we thought was a dip, only to find out it's the first dip of many. The second reason is inconsistency. Life will always do its best to get in the way. The boiler breaks, a period of parental leave reduces your income, a redundancy forces you to pause. Contributions stop for a few months, and then you fall out of the habit and it's harder to restart. In the case of income being reduced, say for example you were investing £500 a month and then took a pay cut, or due to childcare your costs have increased. You may now only be able to invest, say, £50 per month. But because this seems so insignificant compared to what you were investing before, you don't bother doing it. That's how you fall out of the habit. Part of this as well comes back to having that clear target. The tipping point doesn't mean you can suddenly stop working, but it's the point at which you're no longer doing the heavy lifting with your investments. And this is such a powerful position to be in, and knowing exactly what that target is adds to the motivation of staying consistent. One of the easiest ways to maintain that habit is automation. A direct debit that goes out on payday and never requires a decision is far more likely to survive a difficult period than one that requires you to actively remember to invest each month. The behavioral barrier of restarting a habit is much higher than the barrier of maintaining one. And the third reason is that people draw from the portfolio before it's had chance to really pick up speed. The thing I encourage all the people I work with is to have multiple pots, each pot with a different purpose. This investment pot we're referring to here should be the longest term one, the one designed for retirement. But you may want to have some shorter term goals and projects, perhaps a holiday fund, a new car fund, a new house fund, and of course, an emergency fund too. This may sound like overly complicating it, but by setting it up in this way, it means only in the rarest of cases would you need to draw from the big pot. The less you touch it, the better your return. So much of investing is psychological, and there's something about the early years of investing that creates a particular kind of anxiety. You're more likely to check your portfolio too often. You feel guilty if you miss a contribution, and you always feel you need to be doing more as the growth is so slow. That's where the temptation to overtrade and tinker comes from. Some of that anxiety is useful. It keeps you engaged and it stops you from becoming complacent. But the hardest part of investing is time and patience. Most attempts to speed this up actually end up slowing it down. But something you'll notice shift around the tipping point is your work relationship. Before the tipping point, your income is the primary engine of your wealth building. After it, the portfolio is contributing independently of whether you go to work tomorrow. that changes the nature of the dependency. It won't always mean you can suddenly give up work, but it could give you more options. Early retirement or reduced hours becomes a realistic conversation. So not necessarily stopping work entirely, but having that choice. And that could be the first time you've ever had that choice. You also have a choice around your contributions too. After the tipping point, additional contributions have a diminishing relative impact because the portfolio compounding is doing so much of the work. That doesn't mean stop contributing altogether, but again, it does give you options. You can more easily justify redirecting some of what you would have invested into experiences, trips, and time with the family. The kind of things you can't really quantify, and also the kind of things you won't regret. You can't take that money with you. Being able to do this prior to retirement is extremely powerful because you know your portfolio is still growing without your input, and actually will continue to grow quicker each year it compounds. That's why understanding where you are relative to the threshold is so important. You can do this today. Take your portfolio value and multiply it by 0.07 and compare that to your current annual contributions. That will tell you how close you are. You can also work the other way too, by taking your annual contributions and dividing it by 0.07. That will give you your tipping point. You can then use a compound calculator to determine how long it will take to get there. To be clear, the 7% is only a rough guide and only works over a long period of time. The stock market rarely matches its average in a single year. There will be some wild swings. But as long as you're in a diversified global portfolio, you can ride it out. Easier said than done, of course. A lot of people assume your 20s are your most powerful investing years, and that if you didn't maximize them, you've missed the boat. But this actually couldn't be further from the truth. To find out why, watch this video next.